We had no idea at any point that he had an issue with opioids. We thought it was alcohol, marijuana, and Xanax.
That's Admiral James Sandy Winnefeld, who lost his 19-year-old son Jonathan to overdose in 2017, just a few days after dropping him off at college. We'll get to my conversation with this Navy top gun who has now started the nonprofit SAFE project to combat the overdose epidemic in just a moment. First, I want to thank all of my listeners for helping to grow this podcast. It's such an important time to better understand what's going on with fentanyl in the drug supply and a place for families to find support, to know they're not alone in their grief. I got a message from Courtney about the podcast that says it really shows how many people are impacted by addiction and substance use disorder and shines a light on how important it is to take steps to combat this disease. Diane Eide, who told the story of losing Trace, her son, to a meth overdose in episode 45, writes, "I feel the work Emily's Hope does and this podcast is so very important, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. I want to thank everyone for their messages of encouragement, and I'd ask you to write a review of Grieving Out Loud. It does really help get the podcast out to more listeners. And please excuse my raspy voice. I'm on week 6 of laryngitis. It's getting better every day, and I am sure I'm going to recover. Well, now back to this episode's interview. Admiral Winnefeld served as a senior aide to Colin Powell and vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, but none of his military training prepared him for the troubles his son Jonathan faced or what was about to happen to him. Now, Sandy, as he asked me to call him, is using his personal tragedy and connections to make a difference in the lives of so many. Well, Sandy, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this podcast. And I want to start off by just telling you how sorry I am for the loss of your son, Jonathan.
Thank you for that. We are, as we mentioned earlier, part of a club that nobody wants to belong to and that you can't leave. You understand the grief that's associated with losing a child for any reason. It doesn't matter. And we've been through that, and it's horrible. And the best thing we can do to, make it is to make a difference. Try to prevent other families from going through the same thing.
Right. That's exactly how I feel. I just don't want any other mother or father to ever experience the kind of thing that we have, because it is so heartbreaking and devastating. First, I want to learn a little bit more about Jonathan. He was only 19 years old. He was a freshman at University of Denver. Can you tell me a little bit more about him and what happened?
Yeah, so Jonathan grew up in a military family as the youngest of 2 sons. He was a magical kid. He was wonderful, kind, didn't have an enemy in the world. He was very creative, as second kids can be. Growing up in a military family, he moved around a lot. And even though his older brother was fine with that, but Jonathan did not like it. And I think over time, he began to develop some anxiety and a little bit of depression. And we, had him, seen, and he was misdiagnosed as being ADHD. And we sort of resisted that for a while, but they said, no, this is what it is. And they prescribed, drugs for that, Adderall. And he started taking the Adderall, and that seemed to help a little bit. But we noticed that there was liquor missing out of our liquor cabinet. And when my wife confronted Jonathan with this, it was like, hey, I'm not a party kid. I'm just taking this to come down from the Adderall at the end of the day, because Adderall is probably the worst thing you can give somebody who's got anxiety. One thing led to another, and he started, smoking weed, taking Xanax, probably fell in with some of the wrong kids, but he was really just a great young man.
At what age did the substance use start?
Probably around 8th, 9th grade.
Don't you think, when you talk about, I think often, because Emily also switched her friends group at about 10th, 11th grade, right? So this sort of started in 9th or 10th grade. Her loyal friends were like, we can't be around this anymore. Don't you think that they're looking maybe for acceptance?
Yeah, it's a little hard with Jonathan because he moved in the middle of high school from Colorado Springs to Northern Virginia. And he got into a school in Northern Virginia that was a little rougher than he was probably used to. And he had a good set of friends, but he had like 2 sets of friends. One was the sort of friends that were in a little bit of trouble. He enjoyed being around them, but he also had some really good kids that were friends. And I think he managed to hide from his good kid friends, what he was doing in order to, take care of his anxiety. And one thing led to another. He had a couple of really bad events. We had no idea at any point that he had an issue with opioids. We thought it was alcohol, marijuana, and Xanax.
Because I had the same problem. I thought my daughter was using weed and Xanax, and I didn't know about opioids. And I feel dumb for not knowing. You're educated, you're experienced,
Yeah, and there are a couple of times when we had to take him in to the hospital, and he never tested positive for opioids during that time frame. So, but eventually he had a really bad episode over the course of the summer and the fall of his senior year of high school. He had a couple of things happen to him. He had a girlfriend who was the first girl in her first person in her family who was going to go to college. She decided, I don't want to be around somebody who's got these anxiety, depression, and drug problems. So she broke up with him. That only drove him sort of deeper into this. He started using a little bit more. And then he was a very, very good baseball player. He was a good pitcher. Found out that his grades had suffered just barely enough that he wasn't going to be able to play baseball his senior year, which drove him even deeper into it. So he had a really bad event in the spring, and we decided we couldn't keep him safe anymore. After a very difficult week of trying to find a place for treatment, we managed to get him into a really good treatment facility in Pennsylvania. He went through 15 months of treatment that cost us out of our pocket the equivalent of a 4-year Harvard education. But we wanted to do anything for him that we could.
Of course.
And then, and we watched our son recover before our very eyes. His brain started to heal. We could talk to him again. He got his emergency medical technician qualification at another treatment facility in Connecticut. And so it was decided that, okay, he's going to have to come out into the real world, and we'll send him to college. And a couple of things of interest there. One, he got into the University of Denver. And when you're a freshman at Denver going in, you have to write an essay. And you have to read a book and write an essay before you get into the school that fall. And the topic of the essay that fall was, who has had the most profound impact on your life? And of course, I would like to think it was me. But he writes this powerful essay about being on an ambulance ride when he's getting his EMT qual, and finding himself on the floor of a McDonald's bathroom performing CPR on a man undergoing a heroin overdose. And he writes this powerful essay about how he decides right then and there that he's going to dedicate his life to people who can't help themselves. And what if this man doesn't survive the night and all that? So the essay starts, the person who's had the most profound impact on my life, I don't know his name. I don't even know if he's alive. So we're like, touchdown, this kid is back.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then he went and he got a job to kind of keep himself out of trouble on weekends with an EMT group that does all the sporting events around Denver Broncos, Denver Nuggets. And they said, we want you to get a EKG qual in addition to your EMT qual. So he went to a wonderful paramedic training facility in downtown Denver. But the walk home from that facility went by Denver's open air heroin market, and somebody offered him heroin, and you can't resist. It's really hard to resist that when you're fresh out of treatment. And he relapsed, and a few days later passed away on his 4th day of college.
Because there was fentanyl involved.
Because there was fentanyl in the heroin that he was sold by a person in Denver. I remember a couple of days, when I had to leave. A couple of days before that, his 2nd day of college, I said, John, are you going to be able to handle this academic environment? Are you going to be okay? And he said to me, Dad, I'm going to be fine as long as I can keep my recovery on track, which is how deceptive somebody can be when they are under the influence of this horrible drug, because he had already relapsed at that point.
Sure, right. Because part of addiction is denial. I mean, that is one of the things that happens. I mean, I am so sorry for your family. It's just, I think about, oftentimes when I speak, I'll show a poster of all young lives lost, of stories that I have. And I just think of all the lost potential. I think of all of Jonathan's lost potential, Emily's lost potential. And it just breaks my heart.
Yeah. Jonathan wanted to be a paramedic fireman, and he knew that in order to get those jobs, sometimes you have to go to college. And so he went to University of Denver. He was going to major in criminology because that's the closest thing they had to being a paramedic fireman. And he was all set to go, but we lost him in his dorm room. It was the worst day of my life.
Of course it was. Tell me about Safe Project, how you came about to form this nonprofit, and a little bit about what your goals are. I mean, how you're a year ahead of me in this grief journey. Jonathan died in 2017, Emily died in 2018. I can see, how different it is now, even compared to a year ago. It does change as you go along, but how long before you formed the nonprofit?
So I had sort of toyed with the idea of doing a nonprofit before any of this ever happened. It's kind of like, the back half of life. Maybe you can find something to give to. I didn't realize how it was going to turn out. And I'd say in the 3 or 4 days after we lost John, my wife, Mary, and I were sitting on a couch in our house. And we were just saying, we can crawl into a little ball of anger, grief, and shame. We're going to do plenty of that over the coming years. But, we might be able to do something about this. So we should start something. Did sort of two things. And this is literally right after we lost John. It first researched what it takes to start a nonprofit, which, as you probably know by now, is not an easy task. And the other is, okay, what is the approach of this nonprofit? What would we do? And our original thought was, well, we'll just get donors from our network, and then we will parse out the money to other nonprofits who are doing good work in the space. And then we decided that, no, we're going to do it. We have our own beliefs here about what the nation needs to do to solve this problem. And we literally wrote those down that week and decided that that's what we were going to do. So we've got about 18 people working for us on what Safe Project, which stands for Stop the Addiction Fatality Epidemic, what we do. And it's been a real labor of love. And we've got great people doing great work every day.
That is amazing. With Emily's Hope, it's just me and my husband and one part-time employee. So you have 18 employees. I mean, I see you have a lot of initiatives. When I looked at your website, one of the things that stood out to me, I guess, because it's so near and dear to my heart, is I'm trying to stop stigma through education about disease as an addiction as a disease of the brain. And I see you have a no shame pledge. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a great thing that you have on there.
Yeah. And the no shame pledge is about recognizing addiction for what it is, pledging that you're going to help anybody who is in substance dependence. And we've had a pretty good take rate on people signing up for the no shame pledge. And it's really just sort of a reminder of this real, as you said, this is not a moral failing. This is a physical disease of the brain that can happen several different ways. Yes, it can happen on the party path, but very often it happens from somebody who has a medical or dental procedure and is maybe genetically predisposed to being addicted. And within a few days, all of a sudden you're dependent. And then there's the sort of resolving anxiety and depression end of it. You might have somebody who has a medical procedure and they're fine after a couple of days, but they've had painkillers and the painkillers took care of their anxiety. And that's what catches them. We've seen that time after time. So yes, killing the stigma. Stigma is public enemy number one of this crisis.
Well, and I think just by you speaking out with all of your amazing qualifications, your wife Mary's educational qualifications, I think people still have that idea, oh, this happens to other people over here. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I really want to thank you for the fact that you are so public with Jonathan's story, and for the fact that you have started this organization and are working so hard to make a difference.
Well, thank you. It's not something we wanted to do.
No, nobody.
It's something we feel we have to do, and we've gotten a lot of great support from people. And it's interesting on the stigma side. We'll very often have people come up to us and sort of whisper to us, like, yeah, I've got a brother who, whatever. Right. And it's like, we'll talk about it. It's okay.
Right. I often say when I show the faces of overdose, I say if these were the faces of cancer, you would not
AIDS.
have.
AIDS had a stigma associated with it, right?
Right. Well, I often I often liken this whole epidemic to what happened in the AIDS epidemic, because it took a bunch of angry, I say mothers, but I mean, I know you're a dad, a bunch of angry moms to come forward and, quit writing fake obituaries, to talk about what was really happening and to demand change and to demand funding to make a difference to end the AIDS crisis, which now AIDS is no longer a death sentence, right? HIV is no longer a death sentence. Right. So,
yeah. And this is a much more, as complicated as the HIV problem was, this is much more complicated, I think, in terms of the things, interrelated things that we need to do as a nation in order to solve it.
Yeah, you have kind of your pulse on a little bit of that. I know, just because of your history and also where you live and the work that you do. Well, what do you think will stop overdose deaths from rising. I mean, when Emily died and I said there were 72,000 deaths a year, and now we're up to what, 103,000 in the last year of overdose deaths. I mean, how do we stop this?
Yeah. Well, as you know, the two biggest contributors to that dramatic increase, because we were actually making a little progress for a while, but the two biggest contributors to that huge increase were COVID, with the anxiety, the loneliness, the fear, the isolation that people felt, amplified a lot of mental health problems in the nation when people turned to substances to resolve that. And it turned out that the substances they were turning to were full of the second factor, which is easily imported and very deadly fentanyl, which is easy to make, easy to ship, very cheap to make, and huge profit margins for the drug dealers and cartels who are doing this. So that's what blew it up. But in terms of solving it, we've always believed that there are sort of six lines of operation in military terms, I guess, that the nation needs to do. And the first one is, as we talked about, public awareness, so that we can do two things. One is get the money that's required to do all the rest of the things we need to do, but also to resolve stigma, to get stigma out of the lexicon. So that's thing number one. The next thing is prescription medicine and medical response. So on the prescription medicine side, more responsible prescribing practices from doctors and dentists as well. The whole buprenorphine, Narcan to buprenorphine, first responders, buprenorphine, getting people into treatment, that sort of thing. And also one of the things we do is Gone for Good. We, in fact, this in April, we're going to partner with a company we've partnered with, Deterra, that makes a very good drug disposal packet. And we're going to send 30,000 free packets out to anybody who applies for one gets one. And that'll get us up to 100,000 that we've put out so far, which is the equivalent of killing 9 million pain pills. And so we do that. That's thing two. We also do a lot with law enforcement and justice. We're not going to arrest our way out of this thing. There's some things that we can do in that world. Another, of course, is treatment and recovery. We have a treatment locator on our website. If that protects your privacy, if you're looking for treatment or a loved one's looking for treatment. And literally today, we have added to that treatment locator a family support group locator. So 600 family support groups across the country that we scoured the country to find, put them in a database, and now you can find one that's near you, hopefully. And then the last thing is family support and advocacy, where we help a lot of families who are going through either in the midst of a substance dependence problem or in the wake of a tragic loss.
I feel like there's so many of us out there now. I mean, that's one thing I'm always hearing from other parents who listen to my podcast. The one thing that people need to know is they're not alone, that this has touched every corner of our nation. What do you think is the best way to stop fentanyl in its tracks? I mean, what can we do? You hear a lot of debate over this subject. So I'm just curious what your opinion is.
So I was very privileged to recently serve on the Congressional Commission to prevent the illegal importation of synthetic fentanyl. We had 4 members of Congress on the panel. We had leads from each of the major government departments and agencies, and there were 4 of us independent people who were on the commission as well. So we really examined this problem, and I'm really happy in the sense that the commission members agreed that it was not only a supply problem, it was a demand problem. And so on the supply side, China, believe it or not, is actually doing some decent, not great, but decent work to stop fentanyl, but they're not stopping the precursors to fentanyl.
Right. The raw ingredients. Yeah.
Which they freely export to Mexico. And so it's put together in very simple drug labs and then imported through FedEx, UPS, the mail service, you name it. It's not a matter of stopping people crossing the border. It's just mailed in, or packages coming.
I try to tell people that, and I get into a big debate.
The law is not going to help. But and I don't mean to be political when I say that, because I'm an apolitical person.
I know this should not. I'm not political either. Yeah, I'm a journalist. I'm not political, but I think people need to know the truth about how fentanyl is getting into the drug supply.
Sure, and so there are a lot of things that can be done along that chain. It's a very difficult problem. There's technology that can be applied to some of these massive facilities that are processing packages. There's more manpower that can be thrown at that problem. There's encouraging governments to be more responsible in interdicting it. And, so there's a whole chain there that can be worked. And then, of course, on the demand side, all of the things, and that's where I paid most of my attention on the commissions, on the demand side of this 6 lines of operation kind of thing, where, making sure people are knowledgeable, getting rid of stigma, getting proper prescription drug policies in place, treatment, recovery, knowledge. People need to know that most of the fentanyl that's coming in and killing people is counterfeit prescription pills. So if you're somebody who has a chronic pain issue and your insurance is not paying for the low level of opioids that you think you need to have to manage that pain, and you go out and somebody on the street says, well, I've got some for you, it's probably got fentanyl in it, and it could kill you on your first try. So there's just a lot of knowledge out there, but it is an awful problem with a very complex set of situations and no single lever to pull.
Right. It is so complex. And I think also the whole pill aspect, most people, most kids are comfortable in taking, not everyone's comfortable in smoking or injecting heroin. I mean, I think it takes another level to get to that point, right? But I've had moms on my podcast who've lost their sons. They both died together after a night of drinking. They were beer truck drivers. They're drinking beer and they took one pill. They snorted one pill, because I think people have the idea that, oh, it's real, or that a pill is safe. And nothing could be further from the truth. But until we get that message out there, especially to kids, I think the idea of experimentation or the idea that those are rites of passage, those days are done.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that people need to understand is that there is a belief out there that in order to die from a drug overdose, you have to be an addict. You can die on your first use of fentanyl because it's that powerful. It attacks the synapses in your brain, the receptors in your brain. And those receptors are not only receiving opioids to manage your feeling of well-being and pain, they also help manage your breathing. And when you die of an opioid overdose, you suffocate because you quit breathing. And that can happen to you on your first shot. And it has happened to many people on their first uses. So it's not your father's drug. It's not, oh, let's go out and smoke some weed. It's deadly.
Right. And that message needs to get to everybody, I think. I love what your organization is doing, all of the pillars that you talked about, and in every way that you're serving and trying to make a difference. And you have some connections and some influence in Washington. What about money? Do you think there's enough money going to this problem?
Not at all. There's not even close to enough money. This is a national crisis. It's a 911 that's happening every month. And if this were a terrorist act happening on one day, it would be the worst thing that ever happened to our country, right? So, the stigma associated with that. So nowhere near enough resources being applied. Yes, it's great that we got the Sacklers to cough up $6 billion or whatever it is. That is a drop in the bucket compared to what needs to happen to resolve this problem.
So where does the money come from? How much do we need? And how do we get lawmakers to take notice and to actually do more?
Well, there are some lawmakers who are taking notice. I mean, the people who participated in the commission, not enough, but, bipartisan. Senator Tom Cotton was a co-chair, and David Trone, a representative from Maryland, was the Democratic co-chair, and they get it on this. It's one of the only bipartisan things I've seen happen in Washington in the last 10 years was this. But still, there's not enough attention being paid, not enough of a sense of urgency, because as you say, everybody's thinking, oh, well, this is just happening to, dirtbag families. And it happens to some pretty tough families, to be sure, but they're important too. They're American citizens like the rest of us. We need to help those people every bit as much as we need to help people who look like you and me, who are suffering from this as well. Every
young person. I mean, it's lower the life expectancy in this country. More people die from overdose than car crashes, cancer, any of the other things that are out there. And it's just, to me, it's just shocking. I mean, I know we're very concerned about COVID-19, as we should be, and the pandemic, but we really need to, maybe now that we're getting close to an endemic, possibly, we really need to switch our focus and say, hey, we have to save these young lives. We cannot afford. Plus, you just think about, I mean, I've written blogs about this, and I've talked to the loss of one life and how that affects so many others. I have a friend, a mother whose son died of overdose, part of this club we talked about, who completed suicide. She could not. And I just spoke to another man recently, and his wife, after their son died, drank herself to death. It took 3 years, but she drank herself to death after that.
Yeah.
So it's not just that one death. It's like a ripple effect in the pond.
It's affecting a lot of families deeply.
Yeah.
And breaking families up. I think it needs senior leadership attention. We've had these terrible distractions. COVID was obviously a huge crisis that, distracted from the efforts here. I know that President Biden mentioned it in a State of the Union speech that we need to do better in this area. And I'd like to see Congress, with a thoughtful plan that's properly funded to try to work this. There are some other things, though, that could be game changers. One, there is some really good research going on right now regarding taking the same kind of approaches that we took with COVID, with immunology, basically, to try to combat fentanyl. So immunotherapy. So there's one gentleman I know who's doing research where he can inject an antibody into a person that it acts like Narcan, but for 3 weeks. So you wouldn't give this person in an acute situation, in a revival, life-saving, you would use Narcan. But if you give them this injection pretty much right away, then the immunotherapy essentially consumes any fentanyl that enters the body, and you cannot overdose.
That's amazing.
That's going to enter FDA trials here in the next few months, and probably into humans early next year. And then at the same time, this gentleman is developing a vaccine that will train the human immune system to produce the same antibodies. So you can give somebody the vaccine and they will actually develop the antibodies that will consume the fentanyl. Now, that's not for everybody, because some people actually need fentanyl, right? If you have an emergency or acute pain. But for people who are either undergoing the difficulty of addiction, to help them handle that, but also in some cases, first responders, they're vulnerable to incidental fentanyl that's, dust on somebody's body. And now if you can give this to a first responder, they're probably a little safer from getting an overdose just from administering it to a patient.
Well, you've blown my mind, because I hadn't heard anything about that. Yeah. And that's fascinating to me. I'm going to do a little research on that. Also, I think our treatment centers need to be part of medical systems. As anyone now can hang up a shingle, call themselves a treatment center. There's no kind of standards, or it was kind of a money grab, once insurance companies began covering, and insurance companies also at the same time dictate how long someone can stay. And we know it takes, 13 to 24 months for the brain to heal from some of these substances.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just think that we are all over in our criminal justice. We have so much work to do because our criminal justice system isn't working to treat people, at least in my state, either.
No, the people who are incarcerated are not getting any treatment at all. And I tell parents that, what happens if your son or daughter is put into treatment for 30 days, you get 30 days of sleep, because when they come out, they are not treated. They are not cured. It does take literally that amount of time. And then even then, it's a very, very vulnerable time when somebody comes out of treatment, because they're most susceptible to relapse at that point, and their opioid receptors are reset. So if you take the same dose that you needed when your opioid receptors were, totally, messed up, when they're clean now, you can really easily overwhelm them and get into an overdose. And that's exactly what happened to Jonathan.
Oh, of course. Yeah, we need major shifts in our thinking, in our funding, all of these. Our thinking of how we treat these things. I heard a law enforcement officer say to me once, instead of sending people to prison, I think we need to send them to, maybe we take some of these empty nursing homes and send them to recovery centers where they can't leave. Yeah. They're sentenced to this recovery center, but we give them treatment. And I thought, that's a great idea. Why aren't we doing that? That's a pretty simple idea. Yeah. I just think...
one of the things that we're doing is we have our treatment locator, and the data we use for that treatment locator comes from a database that's produced by SAMHSA, which is the Substance and Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And we actually got SAMHSA to, rather than updating it once per year, they update it daily now. So we have a good source of data now this is for treatment centers. And the data is not perfectly clean, but it's there, and it's government data. What we don't have is data on recovery houses. And that's where the real trouble lies. That's where you can hang a shingle up and anybody can, and some of these people are body brokers, And so we're working very hard on our own to put together a database of recovery homes so that we can have a recovery home locator. We're not there yet. I wish the government would require recovery homes to have at least some kind of standards and licensing.
So you're talking about a sober living, like a sober living house or some after type recovery care. House.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's fantastic. And you're vetting those. And I don't think anyone else is doing that. Not that I've heard. So I love it that you guys are doing that.
There are a couple of people out there doing it, but it's small scale efforts, I think.
I want to turn, we talked a lot about the drugs and policies and funding and all those kinds of things. I want to just get a little bit personal right now because I really want to know about your grief and a little bit about how you have coped with your son's death, because I have so many parents talk to me, and I feel like they're barely hanging on by a thread. There's not a lot of support out there, at least not in typical channels that you think of, because even like when I talk to audiences, I will have a parent come up to me and they will say, I lost a child too, but it wasn't to drugs. And I always just say, well, it doesn't matter. Losing a child is losing a child. I don't care how they died. Yeah. But it goes back to that issue of stigma. So I want to talk about your grief, maybe your wife's grief, your other kids, like how you all have dealt with this personally.
Personally, for me, I grew up as a naval aviator, and we, when you're trying to land an airplane on the back of an aircraft carrier at night when the deck's moving and the weather's bad, that's really hard. And we tell our pilot, you can't be thinking about your financial situation. You can't be thinking about your relationship. You can't be thinking about your parents' health when you're trying to do that very difficult task. So you need to take all of those stressors in your life and put them in a little box in your mind and put them in the corner and just put them away when you're trying to do this activity. And then when the time is right, go in that corner, open that box and deal with it, deal with the challenge, or in this case, the grief. So I've been sort of trained to suppress stress, to suppress that kind of thing. So I kind of had an advantage going into this. It was still, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my whole life. And I don't want to downplay it at all. But I think what I tried to do was, I've always tried to turn a negative into a positive and turn the grief into some kind of positive action. And that's how I handled it. And not everybody is that way. No, but not everybody has the resources to do that kind of thing.
It's interesting to me that you talk about training, because I often say the same thing. I have covered over the course of my career, more than 3 decades, as a broadcast journalist, all kinds of horrific, deadly scenes, whether they be building collapses, accidents, fires, drownings, whatever it might be. And then you have to turn to the camera and put all that aside, kind of put it in a box, right? Mm-hmm. And then talk about it, which is why I say I'm always able to talk about Emily, but that's not like that doesn't pop up later. I would imagine the same is true for you, that some of those feelings pop up at different times, maybe inconvenient times.
Yeah. And I think, my wife puts it a way is that the grief never gets better. You just learn to deal with it better.
Live with it.
And you live with it. Yeah. And, it's tough. You think about Christmas time. It's like, man, I wish my son was here enjoying Christmas with us and those sorts of things. It's just terrible. But again, trying to focus that into a positive thing and away from the negative. And I've always believed humans are very good at making themselves miserable. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to try to turn this into something positive. And I believe John was a warrior. He was fighting a very difficult fight. He was working hard to do it, and he lost. He lost the battle, but he's going to help us win the war. And I don't mean the war on drugs, because that's not a popular term anymore. But he's going to help us win this thing, because he's inspiring a lot of other people. He's inspiring us. He inspires our staff, and we want to do this for him.
I love that sentiment. What about your other kids and your wife, Mary? How have they coped?
My older son, who's in the Marine Corps, he's just another fantastic kid, and doing very, very well. He felt really badly because he was stigmatized about it. To him, it was like, hey, I went to the Naval Academy. I'm doing well. I'm working hard. I'm successful. Why are you, taking drugs? Why are you doing this? And he didn't really understand. So he was fully stigmatized. So he actually wrote an op-ed in USA Today about stigma that was published.
I'm going to put a link to that. In the podcast.
Yeah. Basically owning up to the fact that he was stigmatized, and he didn't realize what his brother was going through. And then he respects John for his struggle.
I would say that I call him my straight arrow kid, my son, very bright, very goal oriented, very directed, felt the same way about his sister. He did not understand, like, why are you doing this? He was embarrassed and ashamed by those things because it's nothing he would ever choose, or not that it's a choice. It's just not something he would do. And so, and he was pretty young when all this happened, 16. But I would say that he also has really come around, and he is such a champion of the cause now.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. And we have a sister-in-law in Denver, Mary's sister. She was in Denver when this happened. And this was very difficult for her, understandably. It was her nephew, very special young man. And she has also worked to turn this into a positive. And she's doing great work with something called the Colorado Consortium that has to do with, fighting this challenge. And she is a force of nature out there in Denver, Colorado, working this thing. So, different people deal with it different ways. I respect completely the different ways that people feel this. The one thing that I hope that people won't feel is guilt. Because, chances are you probably tried to do everything you could for your son or daughter, and you may not have known what they were going through. And I consistently tell myself that, if I only knew then what I know now, I would still have my son with me. I just didn't know what he was going through, and I didn't know the danger he was in. Otherwise, I would have done something completely different. And I don't feel guilty about that. I feel bad about it. It's a horrible feeling, but it's not a guilt feeling.
Well, that's interesting to me, because sometimes I think I was working on a story on the day Emily died on Good Samaritan laws and overdoses. And I knew that my daughter had a problem. We were working on an intervention for her. That night, we were going to read our letters, but I never imagined that she was doing something that would cause her to overdose. I don't know why. I couldn't see that or get that through my head. And that's hard for me sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, mothers and fathers are a little different too, maybe, but
I felt the biggest risk for Jonathan. I thought there was a very good chance that he would relapse into alcohol and marijuana. But we had to get him out in the real world somehow. Little did I know that he had an opioid issue from before, and had relapsed into that. If I had known he was in that danger, I never would have sent him to college. He would have come home, and we would have kind of protected him a little bit more. But it was just one of those very unfortunate things that happens. But Jonathan's inspiring a lot of people to help try to solve this problem.
And you as well. So thank you for everything that you're doing. I will put links to your website and to Jonathan's story on the show notes for this podcast. So I really appreciate, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything that you're doing. I think we are very simpatico in our efforts and our outlook on what we want to do with this horrible tragedy that neither one of us would wish on anybody, but we're really working to try to make sure it doesn't happen, or we know it's happening to other people, but to try to make sure it happens to as few people as possible.
Thank you for what you're doing. It's amazing. And, the problem for us in one sense, it's not like a business where you can measure your results. We can measure how many people we've talked to, how many people have come to our website. We can measure all of that, but those are input metrics. Knowing whether you've saved a life or not is kind of hard to tell. And we know that's happening. And on those rare occasions when we actually know that we have saved somebody's life because we got them into treatment or whatever, that makes us get up in the morning and keep doing this. So
I would say just
thank you for what you're doing.
Just one life. That's what we're, that's enough.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sandy. I appreciate your time.
You're very welcome, Angela. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Grieving Out Loud. I'm Angela Kennecke. Connect with us online at emilyshope.foundation. Wishing you faith, hope, and courage.